granule stuff. How did, that's okay. All right, is that happy hour time? So that's just a little bit of an invitation, probably you guys have a lot more understanding of how this granularly affects the state and your practices than I do. So I'd love to hear from that, and maybe at the end as well. We can go ahead and get started. Oh, that's me. I was like, what? Is the one to the left, eh? Oh no. I can I can visually describe to you what's on the next page. I said collaborative. We've all got to dance now. Here we go. A walk down memory lane. It's a quick slide, so you can go ahead and flip it in. It's just the left one, right? Okay. All right. So we won't spend too much time talking about what happened last session, but I think it's important context when viewing the legislature and the legislative process as a whole. And when we're talking about what happened last session and then what's going to happen, I think it's helpful to have a little bit of an idea of what we were looking at. So moving chronologically here, this was probably, I think almost anyone would tell you this was the wildest session that the legislature has seen, at least since the Wild Wild West days. My colleague and I started the session, we're all in masks. This is Speaker Dade Phelan getting sworn into the new Speaker of the House role, which was a wild speaker's race that no one thought he would win. He's from Orange, Texas, and I believe has a lot of friends in industry. So a good name just to kind of note, Speaker of the House, Dade Phelan. So this is his family and him watching get sworn in with mask on. Then the insurrection happens. So this is the increased DPS presence walking into the Capitol. For the first couple of days after that happened, that was January 6th, session started January 10th. This was the environment. It was very tense, especially because we're all still in masks. There's no vaccine. We have to get tested sitting outside a tent in front of the Capitol, and then we wait for results before we can go in, and then there's colored bands. It was all very chaotic, kind of dystopian. And we all think all we're going to talk about all session long was COVID. We tell our clients, we're not going to pass a single thing that doesn't have the word COVID in it. And then February happens. And then all of a sudden, everyone's like, what even is COVID? COVID's not real. Let's talk about the grid. And then we move forward, and we're now telling our clients, we're not going to pass anything this session that doesn't have to do with the grid. The grid is it. That's the new pivotal focus. And then we move into a lot of contentious, politically rife issues that sort of overtake everybody's docket. The voting bill. This is a picture of Representative Symphonia Thompson out of Houston holding a sign that her parents were faced with when they were denied to vote. Then this is the heartbeat bill. This has to do with abortion. So the tone of the session, it's like we had 5 or 6 different sessions all in one. So that's just a little bit of context to kind of contextualize what these bills that we're going to talk about are coming out of. Sorry. If you want to just manually do it, I can just, yeah, there you go. All right, so then we had all these sessions. Like I said, it was like 5 sessions in one. And then we get to have 3 more special sessions on top of those sessions. So again, this isn't stuff you guys need to worry about too much, except for it's something that I had to worry about a lot. So you have to at least hear about it for 5 minutes of the conversation. So we had 3 different special sessions. There were threats not to pay legislative staff. If you'll remember, in the second legislative session, the Democrats went to Washington, D.C. to try to delay the passing of a voting rights bill. This is one of the most famous pictures from that because it featured many of the Democrats and a case of Miller Lite that got a lot of free press for Miller Lite. Positive or negative, I'm not sure, but this picture kind of made its rounds on Twitter. But this was sort of like what we're dealing with, okay? And then finally, in the third special session, ultimately, all the stuff that the Democrats were stalling all summer long, it ultimately passed anyway. So, but it made the session, and now coming into this current session, people are tired. People are fed up. People didn't get the summer holiday that they planned with their families that they'd been looking forward to since COVID. People had to go straight into campaigns, which were ugly. People had to go straight into now general elections happen in November, some of which are getting ugly. So in general, the kumbaya-ness of a legislature is not here right now. So a little bit of context, a little bit of framing. Do you want to just, yeah, there we go. All right, so let's take a moment and talk about some bills that passed. Some of these you guys probably know about, one of which I already heard you talk about, above ground storage tanks. I think that's the same thing as underground storage tanks, right? No? Except they're above ground, underground? Well, this bill passed, and I understand that this bill was highly negotiated, came out of a fire that happened in Senator Alvarado's district, I think Intercontinental Fire. And my understanding is she worked for 2 years to pass that bill with Texoga, Texas Chemical Council, industry partners, and it ended up shockingly passing both chambers unanimously, which is a really rare feat. So highly negotiated bill. My understanding is that industry had a large part in helping shape it. So that's one I wanted to make sure that I pointed out to you. And Senator Carol Alvarado is a Democrat, so it's even more impressive that she was able to get it unanimous when she's in the minority party. Senator Birdwell had a bill, the Oil and Gas Investment Protection Act. This bill had a couple different monikers or aliases. Mike Nassie calls it the energy ban. I believe once on the Senate floor, I heard Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick refer to it as, if you ban us, we'll ban you. But this bill was basically saying, it was patterned off the boycott of Israel bill. If you guys remember a couple years ago, and a lot of contracts now people have to sign that say, we reserve the right to no longer do business with you if you boycott Israel. That's sort of like this. It's basically saying, if you're an industry, well, it has to do with how the state invests money in firms or stocks that may potentially boycott fossil fuels. So they're still held to a reasonably prudent investor fiduciary duty. But basically they're saying, if you tell us you don't want fossil fuels, we have the right to no longer invest with you. The state has the right to no longer invest our money with you. So that one passed. That was a lieutenant governor priority bill. Anything in the top 20 or 31 is always going to be a lieutenant governor priority bill. Little tidbit. The senator gave each of the 31 senators one of his priority bills to carry, including the Democrats. They got to work together to come up with one. So it's a little bit of trivia for you. And then finally, this House Bill 4472, this was a highly negotiated TERP financing reform. My understanding is that this will make sure that the TERP program at the federal level remains in place for many years to come, which my understanding is that bill had a lot of different iterations, but the bill that came out was something that most people pretty much liked. So there's some bills that passed. Now it's time to do a little bit of a eulogy, talk about some bills that died. But I will start out by admitting a flaw. This bill, House Bill 2692, about low-level radioactive nuclear waste, that had to do with a very specific waste control systems, nuclear waste storage tank in Andrews County, right on the New Mexico border. So you probably know more about this than I do. Well, I was giving this after I'd already sent my presentation to Lila last night. I was giving this presentation to a friend, and he informed me that bill passed not till the third special session at the very, very end. And it was a different version than originally filed. But that is a bill that it's true that it died, but like a lot of good bills or not good bills, depending on what position you're looking at it from, it zombied, it resurrected, it Lazarus, it came back from the dead, and it ultimately ended up passing. And Governor Abbott signed it into law in September. So that law did ultimately end up passing. And I know Senator Landgraf was happy about that. That bill had a really contentious, had one of the most dramatic moments of the session when former Speaker Craddock out of Midland and current Representative Landgraf represents the Odessa Midland area. So they're both sort of out wild west type folks. And Speaker Craddock is not someone that people mess with lightly. And apparently he called a point of order on the floor that was something to the effect of like, and like the whole audience was like, and killed the bill in dramatic, like like that type of thing. I would imagine like if this had, yeah, it was something that was, people were talking about it. It was in the news, how dramatically and gracefully, and he just shot and killed it, but it came back. So that bill did ultimately end up passing, or at least a version of it did. Then there are a couple others, and I chose these two specifically because, or three, because I think that iterations of these bills may come back. So I kind of wanted to use this to parlay into the next part, which is predicting what's to come, which unfortunately I have very, very little in my crystal ball as to what's to come. Who, honestly, we could probably collaborate. Your guess is as good as mine, like based on those 5 slides we had looked at earlier, how crazy everything became so quickly. But these 3 bills, House Bill 1820 by Erin Zwiener. She's out of Dripping Springs, a Democrat out of Dripping Springs. I think that she's had a lot of issues in her area with both aggregate, the dust and light that occurs from aggregate facilities. And then also, I believe that there were some violations of a laundromat that had chemical toxic waste, and that kind of opened her eyes. And now she's really involved in an environmental justice, environmental caucus. She's kind of taking the initiative to begin in the House. So this bill would have increased TCEQ penalties, made it even higher penalties if you violate something within TCEQ. It actually made it pretty far in the House. It died on the very, very last day that a House bill could die. But because it made it so far, I wanted to make sure that y'all just kind of had that on your radar. Also, this bill from Representative Rose, she's a Democrat out of Dallas area, urban Dallas. It would have taken away a business's charter if they were responsible for an environmental disaster. So Democrats are a lot of the Democrats are pushing a little bit more punitive. They want to see more results for industry violators, obviously. Yep. And I believe that was part of the problem, is that it was not defined in statute, and part of why it died. Representative Tony Rose was on the Calendars Committee, which is a powerful committee. So it's her bill still died, but I think that it may come back. So that's something to be aware of. Finally, Representative Terry Wilson, he's out of the Round Rock, Georgetown area. That area has a lot of aggregate, has a lot of light and dust nuisance complaints that he hears about in his office. He has sort of taken it upon him. Has anyone here ever heard of Representative Wilson and the aggregate fight? No, okay. He's really taken it upon himself to fight for that issue and to increase limitations and restrictions on the aggregate industry, because that's something he hears a lot about from his constituents. So my understanding is that, at least in that particular space, this is going to be a very defensive session for anything to do with rocks, concrete, sort of anything in that space. So my clients who are in that area are really gearing up to prepare. And in part, that has to do with TCEQ sunset, which we will get to next. All right. Looking ahead at Texas sunset. I know that y'all are going to talk about it in November. How much do you guys know about or follow sunset? Is that something TCEQ sunset's on a lot of your minds, or a couple minds, no minds? That's right. But they made it, right? They made it through. Yeah. That's good. So people still have jobs? Okay, that's good. All right, so Texas sunset, what it is and what it is not. Unfortunately, what I want to talk to you about is like a beautiful Texas sunset, over sunflowers and bluebonnets in the hills. But what I have to talk to you about today is what it really is, which is a board of, it's called a commission, the Sunset Commission. There's an actual sunset agency that has about 30 people in it. Most of those people are genuine policy wonks. These are a lot of people I know's dream jobs. Their whole job is to kind of sit in this office and look at Texas agencies and decide, do we still need this agency? And is this agency operating effectively? Is it too much bureaucracy? Are we paying too much for things that we don't need? Are people sitting there on Instagram all day, or are people really doing what they're supposed to do? So they're supposed to be totally nonpartisan. They're supposed to be I really honestly don't know who they are. We don't lobby them. They're isolated. Then they make a packet TCEQ sunset package is about 101 pages long. And in that packet, they put recommendations to the Sunset Commission, which is really kind of a committee. And this is made up of 5 Senate members and 5 House members, and then 2 members of the public. So allegedly, these members of the public are non-interested parties. The 5 House members and 5 Senate members are supposed to be relatively non-interested parties. And then, I guess, and you really can't say they're non-interested parties because they do about 12 or 13 agencies at once. So like Texas Juvenile Justice Department is up for sunset this year. I'm told that bill may keep the whole entire legislature from moving forward at some point because there's so much drama going on in that. So they break the agencies down into little pockets and do them in those little pockets. So where we're at with TCEQs is that TCEQ submitted a self-report, which you can read online. And they basically said in their report, I'll read it for you. You don't have to read it. I'm just kidding. They basically said, we think we're doing okay. We think we could use more staff. We could use more IT, but we think we're doing pretty good, but TCEQ's analyst who reviewed TCEQ said, I don't think you're doing such a good job. I really, really don't. So that's what we're going to talk about. Okay, so the TCEQ sunset report, this is a lot of text on a page. You can mostly hear me just talk about it, but TCEQ sunset report starts out and it's like, we understand y'all have a hard job. We understand y'all are faced with some really hard choices, some really complicated decisions that affect a lot of people. And we also understand that you're balancing environmentalists who may or may not even live in Texas, who have loftier goals, higher goals, who have alternative agendas. And we understand you having to balance that with neighbors, industry people. No neighbor says, hey, you know what I want in my backyard? Some concrete batch, So there's a lot of not in my backyard stuff, and they have to face that and balance that. And then there's also legitimate industry folks who are like, listen, we've got science. We're abiding by scientific guidelines. The federal restrictions are already harsher than Texas for a lot of our air quality, a lot of our other requirements, and we're abiding by those. And TCEQ has to make sense of all that. Who do they believe? So they say, we understand this is a hard job, but they say, but we think you're lazy. We think you're doing bad. We think you're becoming reluctant regulators. We think you're deferring some of the really difficult decisions that should be made at the commission level to staff. We think that the governor appointed the people in charge, and therefore those people in charge should do their jobs and should not be deferring it to TCEQ staff who are not appointed by the governor and who don't really have the authority to be making some of these really hard decisions. They said the people don't trust you. The public doesn't trust you. The legislature doesn't trust you. You guys don't even appear to know what you have jurisdiction over. It seems to us, this is all Sunset speaking, not me, not Kate. Sunset says, it appears to us, you guys don't even know what you're supposed to be doing. And maybe that's the legislature's fault. Maybe the legislature needs to redefine in statute what all you have jurisdiction over. Maybe it's up to you. Maybe you guys need to put out some guidance. Maybe you need to ask the legislature for some guidance. But right now it's a big murky mess and it's not working for us. We don't like it. Nobody's happy. They called out a couple specific things. One of the main things, the first point that they made, especially it's issue 1 in the 101-page report. Again, I read it, so you don't have to, but if you want to look at it, it's issue 1. It has to do with the permitting process. So this probably affects almost all of what you guys do in some way. So people apply for a permit, and right now there's a permitting process after a whole lot of work has already been done. I know y'all know way more about this than I do, but that the complaint is, and it's a long complaint, is that this permit comes too late. The state is not going to deny a permit after they've put in a year's worth of work investigating, after an environmental firm has moved people out there, after there's all this money sunk into this project. Now, at the end of all that, you have a permitting process, a permitting hearing that's open to the public, and the public submits comments and say, my kid's sick because of this, or I really don't want this here, or I can't sleep because of all the sound and noise, or whatever. And they say, oh, well, too bad, too sad, and then rubber stamp it and it moves forward. By the time it's gotten that process, it's too late. So TCEQ wants to bookend the permitting process, or it recommends, I guess really not TCEQ, Sunset recommended that TCEQ bookend the permitting process. So that's one of the main ones that I think industry folks should be aware of. It seems like that may or may not have traction. It seemed like to me, I sat in that hearing. To me, it seemed like some of the members seemed like that made sense to them. One of the other big complaints, and like I said, there's a 101-page report that I'm kind of condensing, but one of the other big complaints, issue 2, is the other one I really wanted to make sure you guys knew about, and that has to do with compliance history. Basically, TCEQ says, listen, we get it. This is self-reported. And we were talking earlier about self-reporting our CLE hours. Self-report. I can say I talked to you guys for 6.5 hours today, get a little more CLE if I want, but that's kind of a silly way to operate compliance history, is what Sunset is arguing. Sunset argues that based on the way that the compliance history is calculated, the large facilities are almost always going to be deemed good. And the small baby facilities are almost always going to be deemed less. And that just has to do with, they take in the average compliance history, they consider a lot of different factors, but they said there's a thumb on the scale for large facilities here. And we would like to see that remedied. So some important context is that this is the third time in the last 30 years that TCEQ has been up for sunset. It was in 2000, 2001, and it was in 2011, 2012. This compliance history issue, from what I could tell, is the only issue that's in all 3 sunset hearing reports, and nothing has changed yet. So I don't know if that's going to change. I don't know, but I want to make sure you guys knew about it, because it seemed to me like something that this recommendation has been pretty consistent, that we would like to see a beefed up, because right now it penalizes you if you do self-report. If you're like, listen, we messed up, we were out of compliance, we're sorry, we fixed it, you get a bad ticker, you get an X on your file. Whereas if someone else is like, we fixed it, we don't really need to tell the state, we don't want to tattle on ourselves, nothing ever happens. There's no one checking on to make sure. So it kind of disincentivizes honesty. And that's just from a policy standpoint, not really a good policy. So those are kind of the 2 main ones. I don't know. I don't know how much water issues you guys deal with. The last session was not a water session. There were a few water bills, but I didn't really spend much time talking about them. There were 2 recommendations related to water here in this sunset. There was one that advised removing the removal clause of e-advisory groups. Any water people here? I don't speak water language very fluently, so that just something for you guys to know about. And then there was one more water bill, water recommendation. It's this 3rd one. Oh yeah, consider all violations when classifying entity as a repeat violator. Oh no, well, oh yeah, here it says 4th one. Require TCEQ to hold its annual meeting regarding priority groundwater management area studies in public setting. A lot of the complaints about this sunset report had to do with transparency. There were a lot of allegations that TCEQ is operating in a building kind of far away, putting tiny print newspaper saying, we're having a public hearing, but don't worry about it. It's not that big a deal. And we don't really need you to know what we're doing. Y'all don't really need to know what we're doing. So it's fine. You know, everybody's fine. So that was a little bit of the tone of the TCEQ report hearing. These are 4 of the recommendations. We kind of just talked about them. These are 4 pulled. I pulled 1 from each of the 5 major groups. Clarifying the statute about permits to be held before and after, require TCEQ's compliance history rating formula to consider all evidence of noncompliance, not just self-reported, with an emphasis on site complexity, and direct to the agency to regularly update compliance histories. That was another big complaint, was that it's very outdated data. Another thing that they really lambasted the agency for was the website is really ugly and old and really difficult to navigate. And I can testify to the fact that I've tried to look up some certain things and saying, well, this is like, I have to really be fluent and know exactly what I'm looking for to make any sense out of who's a good actor, who's a bad actor, who's a super good actor, super bad actor. I mean, so there's a lot of insistence that the agency needs to bolster that. To which, of course, the agency says, you already know, you don't have to be a lobbyist to know. The agency says, oh, we'd be happy to. If the legislature will just, IT is expensive. Websites are expensive. We need someone who knows how to update that. That's what this is really all going to come down to, is who's going to, it's kind of a game of chicken. The agency is like, we can fix a lot of this. And the legislature says, well, you can probably fix it with what you've got, right? Like, so that's sort of the nature of the beast. All right, so there was a hearing. It was in June. It was June 22nd. I sat in that room all day. It was very cold. It was very, very tense. Did anyone hear about this? Anyone aware of this? Okay. It was crazy, actually. I wasn't expecting it to be emotional. I wasn't expecting it to be such a long day. Who you're looking at here, this is Senator Boris Miles. He represents urban Houston area. What? That's right, exactly. So Senator Miles is holding a map of a portion of his district. He's not on Sunset Committee. He just came in to testify. Allegedly, all of these red dots that he's holding on this page represent a concrete batch district in his a concrete batch plant in his district. He was irate. He was emotional. He bussed in probably 100 people who testified one after the other and said the same buzzword. This is environmental racism. This is an environmental justice concern. Kids get cancer. Teachers can't let their kids outside to go play because they have asthma attacks. Grandma can't go to the store because it's smoggy. You know, it's like, and they had complaint after complaint after complaint. So I already told you the TCEQ, and it started out tense because this is when Sunset gets up at their podium and says, and it sort of faces the agency for the first time and says their analysis, and their analysis was way harsher than an average. Most Sunset reports are pretty boring. Like I said, they're written by a bunch of policy wonks, kind of off to the side, and it's usually like thumbs up, thumbs down. Good job, guys. I mean, these government reports are not supposed to be exciting. They're not supposed to be emotional. That's why this one got news headlines. There were news cameras there. And like you said, they bust in. I think public testimony alone lasted 4 hours. People get 2 minutes to speak each. Just a lot of people coming up to give really emotional testimony. And the result of it, well, first of all, the members, those 5 members I told you about on each House and Senate, and then the 2 public members, they did not seem receptive to the environmental racism argument. They seemed, in my Kate Goodrich's opinion, to feel like that was being that people were being dramatic. I think that the tone felt like, yeah, but like, what else do you want us to do? We need industry. And so there was a lot of that. It felt like a kind of a juxtaposition. It felt like they were talking to a blank stare. A lot of people, news articles who picked up on that, pointed out that there's only 1 member of color on the entire 12-person board, and almost everyone who came to testify was a person of color. And picking up on that sort of vibe, people pointed out in the news. So just kind of an ugly situation, kind of an ugly dynamic. We do not know what's going to happen, and this is the most exciting development, which isn't really all that exciting, but this was supposed to be, I was going to come to you and tell you TCEQ is about to release their decision. So now the committee, those 12 people, the Sunset Commission, they then vote on which one of the recommendations from the Sunset report they're going to accept, and to what extent. They can say, we like 1, 2, and 3, but we don't like 4. And then they vote, and then all the recommendations then become a bill that floats through the legislative process like a regular bill. Those bills are the dangerous ones because you can add anything you want to it, basically. It becomes a Christmas tree. You can hang amendments and other things on. But there's been a little bit of a chink in the chain here, because Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick last week very quietly postponed all Sunset decision hearings until after the election. So people are interpreting that. People are reading the tea leaves to say he is getting nervous about his statewide election, that he wants no decisions made, no votes taken, nothing especially that might be lightning rodish until after the general election, which is November 8th. So it's interesting, just politically speaking, objectively, no matter which side of the aisle you're on, it's interesting. It's interesting that something like this would be considered something that would be volatile enough that it would need to be postponed until after the election. It looked to me like the timing of y'all's next TCEQ, who is it that's gonna get, it's you that's gonna get the TCEQ person here? That'll be like November, was that November 22nd or something? Or 17th, so that'll be November 10th is the hearing, so that'll be good timing. You'll be able to see what the Sunset Commission comes up with in their decision. And then by then we'll know the results of the general election. So we can see if there really was reason for him to be nervous. But it's just an interesting thing to note that that something like a TCEQ sunset would need to be postponed until after a statewide election. But we shall see. Okay, and then there's a couple current federal issues, but there's really just one that I want to highlight because it came out of this issue. And then this is our last thing we're going to talk about. And then I'm going to be taking questions. So be thinking if you have any percolating questions. This is your heads up. So this is a lot of text, but this comes out of the TCEQ sunset. The Texas or the Federal Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, has now opened 2 Title VI civil rights suits against Texas, claiming these same environmental racist and environmental justice concerns that were addressed. So I talked to one of my friends when I was preparing for this. He works for Texas Chemical Council. I said, "Are you worried about that? Is that something is that a real concern?" And he said, "It is. They are worried that there might be additional restrictions placed or things that maybe they haven't even contemplated yet." But the response to all this from the state and what TCEQ stood at the podium and said over and over is that a lot of the decisions that people are so mad at TCEQ for, the environmental racist decisions of where they place the concrete batch plants or any of those types of decisions, they kept saying over and over, this is really up to the city. You submit a permit for a site plan to the city. The city approves or denies it, and then it comes to the state. We don't pick site plan places. So like, while we understand this looks bad, this really isn't our problem or our decision or our jurisdiction. To which Sunset says, see, you don't even know. You don't even know whose jurisdiction this is supposed to be. This is part of what the problem is. So, and now the feds are involved. So a lot of work for lobbyists, job security for me, probably a lot of work for lawyers, other people at Jackson Walker, and probably a lot of work for y'all too, trying to navigate all this. So I will now take, let's see, this is where Denise and I work. This is where we really work. This is where our office, our stuff all sits, but we really spend almost all day, every day up there. Want to take this opportunity to remind you to register to vote if you haven't. I'm sure you all have, and to remember to vote in the general election, which is November 8th. And then here's my contact information and my beautiful boss's contact information. I'd be happy to take any questions. General discussion, my thoughts about which Game of Thrones character reminds me of which legislator. Which legislator is the cutest. I mean, who has questions? Any questions? Yes.
Can you comment on potential groundwater issues in the upcoming session? I know you said make groundwater.
I do. So what I can tell you, I have it here in these notes, and I can maybe even give you these notes, but there's quite a lot of about, let's see. This required TCEQ to hold its annual meeting regarding priority groundwater management area studies in a public setting. That's what most of the TCEQ sunset points to. I don't know of any other groundwater issues off the top of my head, but my boss, Leonard Dougal, might. Do you know him? He might. I'd be happy to get your contact information, and I'm sure that there is, and I may just not know it. But
those are called pigments. Those are precursors to groundwater conservation district. You have a pigment area.
Okay.
Process, and if they say there is an issue here, we'll make a groundwater conservation district. But very quickly, I mean, I even forgot there was even a TCEQ deal because it becomes the Texas Water Development Board thing
very quickly,
and that kind of runs it. Way in the background gets TCEQ running a little bit of the show.
Well, I guess that the issue is that they're not holding those meetings in public settings. So I can get back to you if you give me your card. I'm sure that there is stuff coming down the pike, but I know that last session, When I spoke at the super conference, the Liz that I spoke with up there, Liz Fazio Hale, she testified, got testimony on the brain. She spoke to the crowd and said that this was not, that last session was not a water session, and that may mean that there is a water session to come. And I know that there is a ton of water issues, especially in West Texas. And the chair of the Senate Water, Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee is from West Texas. And I know I can say that I recently saw in his office a book about this big about water issues. So I wouldn't be surprised if something's percolating, but I'm not really aware of it right now. Yeah. If it's burbling up to the surface, I don't know.
As far as, you said, Senate Bill number 1 through
31.
31 are the high priority things to watch. Those are like time,
That's right.
which I did not know. So that's really good. I don't watch the legislation, but
Good for you.
which is very
Yeah.
but I'm thinking of the issue, which is why I really appreciate you coming on. Is there a shorthand for the hospital side?
Almost always any bill that's the lower number bill, the more likely it is to pass. Someone has deemed that that's a priority. So like the electric grid bill this session was Senate Bill 3. And then another point is that the budget is always Senate Bill 1 and House Bill 1. So the budget will always take up that first spot. The budget's the only bill, except for a sunset bill. The budget is the only bill that needs to pass, or else we're not done. We're coming back. It has to pass, or else there's no government. Sunset bills also have to pass. Some version of a sunset bill has to pass, which is why a couple sessions ago, the plumbers, just like the bill had to pass. And so it's just like, fine, it passes. And it just basically said, like, you don't even have to be licensed to be a plumber anymore. Like, it's just something. So for a short time, there was this crazy gap where like plumber, you could just be like, I could just be like, well, I'm a plumber now. Like, and then like, you didn't even have, because they had to pass something and no one could agree. So that was like a crazy thing. But so House Bill 1 and Senate Bill 1 will always be the budget. And then like last session, Senate Bill 2 was property tax reform and Senate Bill 3 was the grid. So the closer to the bottom it is, probably the more time we're going to spend talking about it and the more important it is, especially to the lieutenant governor. But the lieutenant governor, this way, I hadn't ever really seen it done this way before, but this way he kind of prioritized, they were almost, except for the big priorities, they were kind of alphabetical. So Senator Birdwell, Chairman Brian Birdwell, he's kind of the main character for y'all to know in the Senate. He chairs Senate Natural Resources and Economic Development Committee. He's out of Waco. He's kind of interesting because he is had served in the military many years, was working in the Pentagon when the plane hit, suffered some severe burns and injuries, moved his family back to Texas, and then got involved in politics here. But he's the chair of the committee that oversees probably almost all of y'all's issues. He's a nice man, and I used to work in that committee. Some of my best friends are still in there. So if y'all ever need like a little, hey, what's really going on with the Senate Natural Resources Committee, I got that plug. And then the House, the Environmental Regs Committee is probably one y'all are most concerned with. That's chaired by House member Brooks Landgraf. He's the one I told you about. That's in West Texas. He's like half House member, half cowboy on Instagram. Like I think he must spend quite a lot of his time posing for Instagram photos. I like to imagine his like wife or children are out there taking him. Yeah, like y'all get a chance to look him up, but it's like he's always like, but he's the chair of House Environmental Regs. So that's a good question, and the type of stuff that, I mean, this is all stuff that affects all of you guys, all of us, and it is so important to have some awareness of what's going on, and everybody wants to be engaged. But just like I don't really know what's going on in y'all's industries, it's hard to keep up the granular stuff. So I'm happy to always serve as a resource. You guys can write down my email, and if you're like, what the heck is happening, like, please shoot me a text or an email. I'll be happy to answer.
What's the latest buzz with the IRA going through? Is Texas looking at all the different. How's it working its way through Texas?
So there was a Senate Finance Committee hearing that spoke to that a couple months ago. There's a new chair of Senate Finance. Her name's Joan Huffman. She's out of Houston, former prosecutor. But that hearing was before the substantive discussion was happening at the federal level. I think right now, mostly we're waiting around to see what the feds are going to do. But the hearing was sort of like, whose fault is this? Is this Ukraine? Like who did this? Why is it so bad? You know, is this Joe Biden? Like whose fault is this? That was sort of the tone of that whole hearing. I just summarized, that was a 6-hour hearing in my life that again, I just summarized to you guys. Y'all got that for free, but that's sort of what the tone was just who do we point the finger at here? I think right now we're waiting on the feds. I would not be surprised if there's legislation about it, but I'm not sure what the state can do. I think that we're pretty bound by the feds on that, but that doesn't stop the state from stating that we want to do things ourselves. Something new that's developing is a lot of state senators and House reps and chairmen are starting to make comments about thinking Texas can do things better ourselves. Recently on the Senate floor, a woman, my former boss, said that she doesn't want to abide by the CDC anymore. We want our own Texas CDC, a Texas version. There's another chair, the chair of Department of Insurance, said that he wants his own Texas Drug Administration. We should no longer be bound to the FDA. When I was preparing for this, Brooks Landgraf made a comment about wanting to reduce the power of the EPA. I don't know. I don't know that this plan is fully baked. I'm not sure we've really thought it through, but it's the tone that's happening. And these are people are saying these in hearings. I mean, the chair of a health committee, who, like I said, my former boss, a lot of respect, but she said that in a committee hearing. She said, I don't think we should have to listen to the CDC anymore. We should just have a Texas disease control. To which the advocate who was sitting there was like, huh, I haven't thought of that. You know, it's like, so I don't really know. And I'm sure, I don't know what could happen for that. I mean, even if they pass that bill, they got to fund it. They got to figure out how to work it. It'll be a long time coming. And that's another point to mention is that even if the sunset bills do pass, and presumably they will, the absolute earliest any of these measures would come into place would be probably September 2023, September 1, but they could come in as early as June 2023. If they're sort of, there's certain ways you can get kind of supercharged, but it's unlikely. They would probably be September 2023. So you'd have a chance and you'd be able to communicate to your colleagues ways to work out, to implement whatever changes are required.
One of the things in the Inflation Reduction Act that we've been watching is the huge increase in carbon credits for carbon storage and deep carbon storage, which actually ties back to the last legislature when they passed, there was I think it was a House bill that consolidated the permitting of Class 6 underground injection control wells, which is permanent geological storage, carbon dioxide within the Railroad Commission's permitting purview. And so they're making a run at Class 6 permitting primacy. This is all probably just gobbledygook to you, but
Yeah,
it's something that we're watching closely just because it's huge tax credits.
Yeah.
And Texas is going to be we have thick sediments as a geologist of good targets for permanent storage of carbon dioxide, and there's projects starting up all over the state. So
well,
it's going to be a big deal.
this is so ignorant. This is such grammar. Is that the same thing as hydrogen hub type stuff? No, okay, that's because I know that Mike is very involved in the hydrogen space, and I think for similar reasons.
Yeah.
There's going to be like 4 sites around the country, and like Houston's really poised to be one of them.
Yeah.
Well, you heard it here first.
It's recorded.
So yeah, I'm like vaguely aware of these issues, and I hear about them, but I would be happy to send if I see anything about it. I'm sure there will be legislation about that.
I would imagine at the federal level, they're going to have to carve out another maybe Class 7 injection well for hydrogen storage because it's pretty unique from other gases as far as
Hard to work with.
it's it's hard to work with and it's, yeah, it has unique properties. Just like they carved out the class 6 injection well, permitting process. Separately 10 years ago.
Okay. I'll keep my eye on that for you. I mean, I'm sure that there'll be something.
I know, just reading that the Railroad Commission is gonna be submitting their application for primacy to Region 6 next month.
Mm,
And Louisiana's almost there. Currently, they're just, people are just waiting.
They're just waiting.
You know, everything, all the green lights and they're just waiting.
Yeah.
So it's happening.
Okay, good to know. I heard that here first. I'll give you credit for that. I'm sure there will be legislation about it, but it's the good news is about this particular industry right now. And I don't want to say anything too far out ahead of myself, but y'all haven't thus far been terribly affected by a lot of the really the stuff we talked about earlier, the really ugly, really ugly stuff. Senator Birdwell plays well with others for the most part. And he's really the leader. Brooks Landgraf is kind of along for the ride, but as far as good things happening and things that seem to help industry, for the most part, I think that this industry is a little bit insulated from some of the political ugliness. I can't speak how long that'll last, especially with EPA continuing to sue Texas. That nuclear waste issue also is being investigated by EPA. I understand they recently declared something they didn't like about that. So, but I think that the TERP thing is a good example. So that's a federal program, if I remember correctly, right? And the feds have said, Texas, you're doing a good job at that. And Texas said, thank you. We want to keep doing it for a long time. And they said, okay, we'll work together, make sure that air quality is being appropriately monitored. And thank you for all that you do. And there's been some collaboration in some of these areas that especially industry people like. Of course, those are often the same issues that people are being bussed in from Houston to complain about. But from an industry perspective, I think most people feel like things are going okay.
Do you think that more funding is going to be allocated for airborne EPA's focus on environmental justice and, you know, Democrats in Texas? Do you think that because they allocate the funds in that bill for where the Region 6 gets a good chunk of money every session to the airborne? Do you think there's going to be more funds allocated to that in the next session in different parts of the state?
I do not know. I do not know is my honest answer. I would not, if this is an issue that's being brought up by the feds, I cannot imagine it won't be addressed in the budget. What I have here in my notes is that basically that TERP bill came to be because the comptroller came to the Senate and was like, we know that you really like TERP and the way that it is, but like, this isn't really working financially. They were like, let us all work together. And my understanding is the whole point is this is a great program. We want to keep going as long as possible. We want it to function as well as possible. We're willing to do what we can to rehab this and keep it as healthy and functioning as possible. And so I would imagine if there's something that can be done, it would be done, because this has already been addressed many times by many different legislatures, and the program has remained intact. That's right. And it's kind of rare for a program, especially with the feds, to survive many different administrations, many different EPAs, many different TCEQ commissioners, and it's all still good. So I can't imagine that something wouldn't be put in. Also, I can tell you this is going to be a huge budget surplus here. Texas has more money than it's ever had in the history of the state. Apparently, recessions and inflations are good for the oil industry. People are buying gas, people are paying more for gas. Texas gets a little bit of a tax off every gallon of gas that we sell, and the state is booming. So if there's money at the general revenue level at Texas for something like this, that it's been clear that people value, I can't imagine they wouldn't fund it. But that's another thing I get back to you on. My one of my very best friends in the whole world works in the Senate Finance Committee doing this issue. So I could let you know what she says. She's much more educated than I am about all things budget. But yeah, it's going to be a good budget session, which sounds like a good thing. Those are harder sessions to lobby, because when every hand is out and there's not money, you can just say no to every hand. Sorry, we don't have money. But now we've got more money than we've ever had in the history of Texas, and a rainy day fund that's never been touched. just money, money, money. But then people are saying, well, what about our schools? What about our healthcare? What about all these other things that are roads? And the legislature is going to have to answer to some of those people at some point, you would think, but they haven't yet. So I don't know. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. I think property tax. I think there will be a lot of movement in property tax this session. I think we're going to see I know. Listen, tell me about it. Tell me about it. I hear you. I think that they're going to invest a ton of money into school safety. I think our schools are going to look different. I think there's going to be a lot of discussion about school vouchers and choice where parents want to send their kids to school, parental choice. And then otherwise, I hope that it's not just red meat, not just because I have clients with vested interest, but just because I know that the members are tired. Members don't want to hate each other. Like everyone wants to get along and do good stuff. So we'll see. Stay tuned or don't. That's fine. Any other questions?
Just comments about succession, but makes it a lot more control within our state boundaries. You know, we just went through what we went through in the storm area and in Irvine, where it's first knocking at the door saying, hey, we could do a better job, we can import power. Has there been anything about that? Or
Yes, so yesterday there was a joint House and Senate committee hearing to kind of check in on what is going on. I don't know. I think that the consensus from industry experts and PUC and ERCOT is that right now we're doing like the least. And I think maybe what we did is maybe enough for now, but I think PUC, ERCOT, that everybody agrees. And also it should be mentioned, both of those agencies are up for sunset this year. And also it should be mentioned, because of these hearings getting pushed back, those hearings have gotten pushed back. They haven't even done their initial recommendation hearing yet. It'll be in December, which means that the actual bill that comes out about it will probably be February or March, which means that if you're a stakeholder in the space, it's already the most chaotic time of session. It's about to get way more chaotic. So I don't know. I cannot speak to exactly what all they're going to do or what's going to happen. I know that there's a lot of attention being given to natural gas right now, negative and positive on both sides. But it's happening and they're talking about it. The hearing yesterday was, the hearing room was packed. People are interested and engaged. It just seems like nobody knows exactly what to do, is my read. Mike Nassi might know. I don't think anybody else knows. But yeah, it's a good question. I mean, you're right. I don't know. The whole Texas independence thing it's like I said, you guys don't necessarily need to know what happened last session, but it's all helpful context to kind of understand what we're looking at moving forward and what the advocates who represent you are looking at to try and figure out like, all right, what's next for our industry if Texas is its own country? What does this look like? So thank you guys so much for having me. Thank you, Lila, for helping facilitate. I'm happy to come back. Thank you. Thank you. I can come back after session and you can tell me how wrong I was about everything if you want. So,
It was the next installment of the soap opera.
yeah, right. It's the story of my life. I mean, it really is. It really is. So I appreciate y'all having me. I appreciate y'all, the work that y'all do. Thank you for keeping my state off and running while we're off doing all this stuff. So do you want me to pass this back?
No, I'll just talk into and look into the deal here.
It's different.
Yeah, it is really weird looking at the camera. I'll just talk to Jonathan. Yeah, so thanks everyone for coming and questions, and we didn't get any questions from the online folks. But anyway, we'll wrap up the meeting portion. I think some folks are staying for lunch that Allison brought. Thank you very much. And yeah, so check the ICE website. I ran through highlights of the upcoming meetings and events, but all of that is captured on the website. So it's a good way to keep up with what's going on, and hope to see you at the upcoming happy hours and so on. And don't forget to vote for the ice board and in the, and this. Lots of voting, so pay attention to that. And thanks again. That was really great.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right.
When you get to
Alright.
figure out slap, though.
Oh, yeah.
Galapagos.
Tell us about
There were big
Galapagos.
turtles.